It was 1997 when the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons was created. So that was the moment when international watchdog with a functional verification mechanism is being launched. So we're talking about something like 20, 30 years there from the moment when we start talking, well, people start talking about it, and when something really functional is happening. You really needed a multi-stakeholder participation in that, but still regulating a weapon which, as I've said it, in principle was outdated because you had a lot more powerful weapons like nuclear weapons already existing. My thought is that it can move faster, of course, because we would need actually mechanisms which would regulate this kind of technology and ensuring that this is used for good. The AI is going to bring actually a lot of breakthroughs in all sorts of fields. If we channel it in the right way, it may actually build a very nice future for human beings and our planet as well.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned in to The Trajectory. This is the 11th episode of our AGI Governance series. And today we're speaking to someone who has been deep inside the United Nations apparatus and understands what it takes to achieve international coordination and agreement around reducing risks. In this particular case, around chemical weapons. Our guest this week is Irakli Beridze, who is the head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics within UNICRI. That's kind of the crime and justice wing of the United Nations. He runs that sort of department in there. I've known Irakli for a great many years, and I knew that it would make sense. We just had Dean Shuelan on speaking to us about how international organizations, national governments, industry bodies all kind of need to form a patchwork to potentially figure out coordination for AGI. Today, I'm zooming in to the international governance world and figuring out what does this look like in the past? And as it turns out, with chemical weapons, there are some lessons, but there's also lessons that I think are maybe a little bit disheartening, and international coordination will have to be a little bit different and a little bit faster as we move forward. So Irakli, like no one else I know, has a view of what the boots on the ground work looks like to achieve that kind of coordination and paints a frank and in some ways stark picture about what that could look like for AGI. So without further ado, I'll let Irakli do the talking. I'll save my ideas for the end of the episode. As always, let's fly right in. This is Irakli with UNICRI here on The Trajectory. So Irakli, welcome to the program. It's been a little while.
Thank you, Dan. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Yes, it was fun to be able to kind of catch you out there in Paris at the Action Summit, speaking about a topic that until somewhat recently hasn't necessarily been topic number one on your various and sundry lists of topics, but that is artificial general intelligence risk and governance. From your vantage point right now, kind of knowing where the tech is, knowing what the trajectory is for AGI, if you think about kind of a 1 to 10 scale of how much you believe we sort of need AGI governance today, you know, we're recording on May 7th of 2025. What is your read on that and why? Like, how would you score that?
Well, Daniel, first of all, good to see you again. And it's been a while, of course, but we know each other for a long time.
Yes, sir.
We've been in many different events together as well, and it was great catching up with you during the Action Summit in Paris. Now, AGI. Look, as you know it, what I've been working on, the center which I'm running, it's called the UNICRI Centre for AI and Robotics. It is under the mandate of UNICRI, and UNICRI's mandate is working on anything related, well, center's mandate is working on anything related to artificial intelligence vis-a-vis crime prevention, criminal justice, rule of law, human rights. It's quite a sort of a long list of, or quite a wide spectrum of the mandate what we have. We have many different projects which we are implementing, and some of them were related to the serious risks. It was more on the sort of a short-term risks, today's risks, and we've been working on those projects, as you know. Now, on the AGI side, I've been always concerned personally and always had this on the radar or on the sort of an agenda of our center to see how close we are getting to this, how close we are getting to the powerful artificial intelligence. And AGI is a terminology which people can use it in different ways, and we're not going to get into the definition of AGI, but I would call it a powerful AI, something which will actually kind of determine the course of our civilization, right?
Yeah.
So if your question is how concerned should we be, or how important the governance of AI is from 1 to 10, it's 10.
Oh.
It is very important. Whether we are able to build the governance structures today, that's a different story. But should we be doing things about it? Should we be building knowledge, understanding, and the foundations? Yes, definitely. When? Yesterday. We should start doing this immediately.
Okay, so this is great. So I'll nutshell a little bit of what you said and we can unpack it. So obviously, yes, you have a specific mandate within the law enforcement space. Those of us who've listened to my other podcast or my work at Emerge, we've kind of covered some of your interesting work there. And on the policing side, you know, AGI starts to clearly, as you had said, determine the future of civilization. Very, very impactful. So in terms of how important it is, I think it would be challenging to say it wouldn't be a 10 so long as you suspect it actually would occur. And of course, now Hinton and Bengio and all the big dogs or many of the big ones are sort of the belief that this is important. But you're also saying, you know, governance today a 10, because I've spoken to some folks in policy, some folks at the big labs. Of course, at the big labs, it might be a little bit biased to say it's not a 10 yet, right? But you know, different opinions from different kinds of thinkers. Some people have said, look, we might be at a 7 or 8 now. Maybe we should be talking about frameworks. It doesn't seem like it's strong enough for us to kind of lock it in now. I'm not saying that opinion is correct, but there is a lot of that in sort of the policy and particularly like the Silicon Valley sort of ecosystem. What is your argument for yesterday? I happen to agree with you in many regards, but why do you see it that way? What do you think is important for other leaders to understand that you might understand?
Well, definitely. I mean, look, so what I'm saying is that starting the conversation and building the foundations of a future governance system takes a lot of time. So from starting a conversation into a functional international mechanism where major players, as well as most of the world, and then I can actually sort of elaborate why it is important that everybody's participating in this.
Yes.
Will sign in or buy into it takes a long time. And that's what yesterday meant. So that we do need time. So once we get, and if and once and when we will get to that powerful AI, what we talked about, it might be too late to actually think about it. And there might be too late to build viable structures and options. That's why I think that it is very important that we are starting this dialogue, and we will take actually practical steps to ensure that countries, players, well, also the private sector, academia understands the risks and understands the opportunities, how to build these governance structures.
Yeah.
So that's where the 10 and yesterday comment came
thing,
in.
Yeah. Is that it's just a long process anyway. And so, well, I think that is, sometimes not even taken into account. Some people will say, okay, it's impossible because it's so bureaucratic. And of course, I can't say for sure if I know we can get it right. I think hypothetically it is possible. But other people say, oh, we can figure it out when we get there. But to your point, the balls all have to be rolling now for that to occur. I mean, realistically, for something to become an issue, I mean, I don't have as much of a familiarity with some of the particular governance structures within the UN around things like nuclear and chemical weapons. You were involved a lot in chemical weapons and what those international treaties looks like. There were private sector, public sector, lots of people involved. Like, what should people be thinking about for timelines? Because some people are at home saying, okay, maybe it takes a year, you know, maybe it takes 2 years. But realistically, what are these pieces? And then we'll talk about that international buy-in you mentioned. But what are these moving pieces and kind of time horizons-ish that more people should understand? Because it's probably more complex than most listeners would grasp.
Look, I mean, I'll give you an example. So there are basically two things here, which is important to take into account. Number one is that to build international treaties, to have the critical mass buy-in of all stakeholders, including countries, relevant stakeholders like private sector and academia and others, is not just something that you can do it overnight. We've never done anything like that overnight. Maybe, of course, there is a chance that once such a powerful AI appears, maybe everybody all of a sudden will become very cooperative and will build it. But are we really going to take that chance? So what has history taught us? For example, I give you an example of the chemical weapons and disarmament related to the building the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is, by the way, is one of the most functional treaties now in the field of disarmament. The negotiations of the Chemical Weapons Convention started even in 70s and 80s and then continued into 90s, and only end of 90s it was possible to build or agree upon a treaty which would ban the production, proliferation, and anything related to the chemical weapons, plus would create a functional international watchdog with an international verification mechanism to ensure that countries who had chemical weapons, they would destroy it under the international verification mechanism. Because by that time, we had around, 40 or 50,000 metric tons of chemical weapons available in selected countries, which had to be destroyed. And countries did not really want to trust each other. So that's why they created a watchdog. And watchdog engineered or overlooked the international verification mechanism so that everybody would trust the verification mechanism consists of international inspectors, and they would go and check and verify the compliance to this treaty. That's a tedious, long process. And this organization still exists. 99% of the or so chemical weapons have been verifiably destroyed, but under the international verification
standards there.
Standards. But at the same time, process which started in 70s is still lasting up to now. So we're talking about many years. And at the same time, this is something, basically a chemical weapon, is something which nobody really needs. So this is, put it this way, an outdated military mechanism. So it's nobody needs chemical weapons currently. So this was an outdated thing which countries wanted to actually, in principle, get rid of. And they built a very functional international treaty verification mechanism. So once we get to the powerful AI, and whether you want to call it AGI or whatever, this would be a very hot commodity. Everybody would want to have it.
Yes.
So create something similar on something which actually everybody needs, and you can actually sort of have a lot of advantage of. It will be a much more harder process than designing a mechanism for something which we don't really need.
There's a lot to get into there. And you just talked about, again, how challenging and lengthy this was for something that is now kind of almost a deprecated tech. How much more challenging would it be for a ubiquitous technology? No mom and pop down the street or small business needs chemical weapons, but presumably if AI is what is handling procurement and handling fraud detection and handling everything else, and maybe it's handling all of customer service at some smaller mid-sized businesses, they're all going to want some access to that, and they're going to want it to be more powerful because that means they can do their jobs. Different forces at play here, but just to benchmark, because we're going to get into some of what would bring us would move us in the direction of maybe where we need to go. Again, the starting yesterday thing, we're going to dive more into that in our future questions. I want to just drop this one on the table for you. The chemical weapon side, talked about in the 70s, you had said, like, when we think about from a first conversation within, let's say, the General Assembly or something, all the way to when the first watchdogs and internationally trusted bodies were kind of checking on each other, was that a half a decade and a half? Like, what did it look like?
97, basically. It was 1997 when the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons was created. So that was the moment when international watchdog with a functional verification mechanism is being launched. So we're talking about something like 20, 30 years there from the moment when we start talking, well, people start talking about it, and when something really functional is happening. Now, don't understand. So I don't want audience to understand it wrong. this is a very complex operation.
Surely.
With the chemical weapons, it's not only the chemical weapons you want to destroy. This treaty also regulates the legitimate production, because there is a lot of chemical industry, and chemical industry itself as a private sector had to have a buy-in into the treaty, because what treaty does, it also ensures that legitimate industry is not going to produce chemical weapons. It's not going to convert its toxic chemicals into chemical weapons itself, so that under the treaty, verification also goes on and inspects actually industrial facilities all over the world as well. So you really needed a multi-stakeholder participation in that, but still regulating a weapon which, as I've said it, in principle was outdated, because you had a lot more powerful weapons like nuclear weapons already existing. And frankly, I mean, you cannot really win a war with the chemical weapons. It's difficult to use. It's very harmful, and it's actually an awful weapon to even think about it.
Yeah.
But on the powerful AI, you have a completely different situation. You have a situation when everybody would want to have it because of these unbelievable advantages they can actually draw, and a lot of good things they can actually do with it.
Of course, we just had the just went live here. The head of the Joint AI Center at the DoD for 5 years was Jack Shanahan, who spoke at length about sort of how challenging this is. That it's not just a weapon; the same tech is going to undergird a bunch of medical breakthroughs and all kinds of other things. So we're going to get into those hurdles, but. Just to nutshell this for the audience, what you're saying is in the chemical weapons space, where we didn't have some of those things that we were dealing with, that we will be dealing with AI, it was a 20, 30-year process from let's have real conversations to let's actually have watchdogs boots on the ground. It was a very, very long process.
Yeah.
Should people expect, hey, it's going to be a few decades until we have watchdogs and stuff with AI, or is it possible that as the risk ramps, it might be possible to make it shorter than that? Because I'm thinking, if I'm 60 when this stuff kicks in, I feel like AI will be like in the multiverse, building new stars from scratch and stuff like that. So, should people think, oh man, it's going to take 20 years, or should we imagine it could move faster? It's obviously complex, but what are your thoughts?
My thought is that it can move faster, of course, and I think that it will probably move faster as well, because we would need actually mechanisms which would regulate this kind of technology and ensuring that this is used for good, as we underlined it, and you've mentioned it, and I've said it a lot of times everywhere I talk, is that AI is going to bring actually a lot of breakthroughs in all sorts of fields, like whether it's in creating new medicine or defeating or actually sort of wiping out all sorts of diseases, or maybe everything, to the education, to the energy sphere, to economy and everything else. And potentially, if we channel it in the right way, it may actually build a very nice future for human beings and our planet as well. So that's why we need governance to channel the benefits of it and sort of minimize or actually eradicate the risks associated to this powerful technology.
Reduce them as much as we could. And we'll get a little bit into some of those forces that might bring it to be a little faster with this than chemical. But it's great for people to hear, hey guys, 20, 30 years for this other international watchdog treaty.
Not only this, look, I mean, apart from the chemical weapons, you have two main other categories of the weapons of mass destruction. You have nuclear and you have biological. On the biological side, currently we have a treaty, it's called Biological Weapons Convention, but we don't have a functional international verification watchdog, which is going to actually verify the existence of biological weapons. So that is out there. Countries have labs. There are labs. There are biological weapons existing, but there is no international watchdog actually, which is overseeing the destruction or proliferation of it. On the nuclear side, you have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which regulates the proliferation of these technologies, but at the same time, you still have countries who have nuclear weapons and there is no treaty which obliges them to destroy it. I mean, they still have it, and it's there. I mean, in international security structures, of course, it's been understood as a deterrent. It's been understood as sort of the way current international mechanisms are constructed. But just wanted to underline that this is there. So.
Yeah, and we'll get back to like the likeness of those existing structures to what would be needed for AI, because of course it's the same in some cases, it's different in interesting cases. I'm going to roll into that.
Very different.
But let's get first into, before we talk about the boots on the ground, how different it will be, and I think which I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. I want to talk a little bit about what ideally AGI governance should attempt to do, and we might break this out into different categories. I mean, of course, there is a lot of stuff in the day-to-day of all kinds of walks of life, including the policing world where you guys operate, whether it's, predictive policing or being more accurate with evidence or reducing harm in certain ways or whatever the case may be, reducing bias. And, there's all kinds of that stuff. But for AGI, I think primarily the people who are tuning in here are kind of concerned about that future of civilization and existential-ish sort of stuff. If you were to kind of nutshell what conversations you're starting with diplomats and within the UN and with your other, smart colleagues on the private sector and whatever else, what are you sort of expressing a structure needs to do? For chemical weapons, it was like basically destroy them all. For nukes, I guess it was destroy as many as we can and then don't let other countries get them and start making more of them. Within AI, what would it be for you? The be all end all, like, look, if it gets done well, Dan, it'll improve it'll allow for the benefits, it'll reduce the risks. What does that require? Just bullet points from you.
A lot of, so this would require a lot of things. Now, just to clarify, is that we're not really working on any AGI structures at the moment, neither our center or UN at large. Not only this, for example, if you look at the high-level debate of last General Assembly, where heads of states are making statements and delivering statements, AGI is not mentioned there. No. There is no UN General Assembly resolution which mentions AGI, so that topic is not really fully existent as such at the moment. And I think that we can discuss that, how to sort of mitigate that, because I think that more information needs to be out there, and delegations, countries, people who are debating the treaties would need to know more on the trajectory of the AI development and potential that we may be getting there. And of course, there are many questions whether it will be 10 years, 15 years, 20 or 50. And I think that's not important. What's important is the trajectory has been very steep. It's been accelerating. And we should not be taking chances that this may actually come up within 5 to 10 years as well.
Absolutely. I mean,
and there are many scholars and many scientists who are directly working in this field, and they're very much convinced that we're not that far from having such a powerful AI in existence.
Yeah. I mean, again, Hinton and Bengio among them. I mean, the last time you and I talked, they were not in the AGI camp, but now they are. And now there's so much more. I mean, there's the number of companies getting funded to do evals or AI safety, nonprofit stuff. It's, hundreds and hundreds when it might have been 4 the last time you and I spoke. So clearly a lot of proliferation. You brought up a great point, though, and I want to dive into what you just mentioned, which is right now, it's not even really being talked about at the General Assemblies. And of course, I think you and I would hope that might tilt and shift because of how civilization defining this would be. This is not just a destroying technology. This is a trajectory of life technology. Getting this right feels monumentally important. But honestly, my experience is if something really drastic doesn't happen in somebody's life, like if their spouse gets replaced by a chatbot because they just fall in love with it, or if they and half of their friends all lose their jobs in the same year because of AI, or robots fall from the sky and do something horrible, it kind of feels like unless the knuckles connect with your face a little bit, most people are just not going to even think it's worth thinking about, never mind putting on the table as a priority for international governance. What do you think are the things to communicate? Because I've started to bite my fingernails a little bit that even the demonstrations of capabilities is all hoo-ha to people. It's all hoo-ha until it hits them somehow. What do you think will get this stuff at those important tables and get these conversations rolling?
Look, there are sort of several things there, and I agree with you. Of course, there has to be a lot more awareness. We need to bring these conversations on all kind of levels, and this is not only in the United Nations. This is actually in the governments on the highest possible levels. When was the last time you've heard any head of state actually talking about AGI? So that's the situation, and this is the fact. I mean, this is neither good, bad. This is just the way it is.
It's where we are.
10 years ago, when I started talking about AI in general within the United Nations, this was a very new topic. Not many people talked about. You mentioned Max Tegmark. I invited Max to this on a side event to the General Assembly in 2015. So this is exactly 10 years ago when he and we had Nick Bostrom and a few other people who presented a possibility of
I remember,
AGI, possibility of actually super intelligence, all kind of things. And at that time, this sounded or seemed very far-fetched. On the level of science fiction. And a lot has happened since then. I can somehow even understand it or relate to why people would think that this would, because there were no examples of it. I remember when I started talking about it, people would ask me, okay, give me an example, show me AI, and it was very difficult to show it. All of it was basically theoretical. And then,
of course,
when first time together with Interpol, I organized something, what we call it now, and we do it almost every year, AI for law enforcement global meetings. Back in 2017-18, we struggled to bring a single example how law enforcement is using or can use AI. And today we have so many examples that we could actually write catalogs and books about it. So a lot has happened since then. And people do need, obviously, once ChatGPT came out, once people saw the generative AI, this has sort of okay, AI is really here, and then everybody starts talking about it. So now, the bad thing about it is that we cannot really afford waiting until AGI rolls itself out.
That's the really tough part.
Because every day after the rollout of AGI, you'll have something smarter than us here, and we are in a very uncharted territories and all the unknown consequences which could be around it.
So to your point, the topic has become more accessible. I mean, again, within all the intergovernmental organizations, there's all kinds of efforts now around AI in a million directions and kind of like little lines and squares people are playing within that stuff. Within all the big tech companies, they're more and more being very overt, right? Google, like Sergey is like, hey guys, you're all going to work a lot more hours. You're not going to work as remote. We need to win the AGI race. Zuckerberg's like, we're trying to do the AGI race. Microsoft, they're all very clear about it. This was not the case a decade ago, even if they were using AI. So public sector, private sector, it's another level. But to your point, okay, let's say we get there. Then we say, oh, okay, let's deal with it. You know, with chemical weapons, we needed enough people to breathe in mustard gas and then a bunch of decades to go by and then be like, got it. But AGI is only going to become smarter and smarter, by the minute. And so the presumption is we cannot wait. What are the kinds of demonstrations or conversations that you think can make this click other than some kind of an unfortunate low-scale disaster here? I'm certainly not an advocate for disaster, but I often do wonder, how can we make the communication click when it's not quite here yet? I mean, what do you think are the kinds of things that need to be shared within the political sphere writ large that are going to make this more salient?
Look, I agree with you, of course, and I'm also very far from sort of wishing or wanting to have any kind of, no, not at all. I think that we have a lot more tools and options before anything happens, and I think there is still time. And I think that we should all be very sort of focused on demonstrating scientifically how this can be happening, or even non-scientifically, that how likely it is that soon enough we are going to have something more powerful than what we have today. And I think this is very, very logical way of actually even explaining it. You don't need to go into the sort of AGI and all these technical features, how this is going to unfold itself. But if you look at it, 10 years ago, we hardly had smartphones introduced, and Google Translate was so bad that nobody was using it. And now you have unbelievable power of generative AI tools, and this is day and night type of situation. And basically, if the trajectory goes like this, every year, this is going to become more and more powerful. So it is very, very logical that within 5 years or 10 years, situation is going to be completely different. A lot of times I've been asked questions like, okay, what do you think is going to be 15 years after from now? How technology is going to look like? My answer sometimes is that, look, what technology was 15 years ago? When you remember 15 years ago, we hardly had smartphones in our hands, or maybe.
I don't even think I owned one back then.
Exactly. So, and it was a very, very different world. I mean, without smartphone, without social media, none of that. I mean, something's good, something's bad, but basically we were in a totally different world. So imagine how much has happened in 15 years, and this is going to be basically times 5 times in next 15 years.
Yeah, so the hope, it sounds like, if I'm going to nutshell this from your perspective, is we've got to have, more capabilities emerge and be able to keep telling a story of how this plot is moving in a direction in all these different domains, whether it be education or communication or entertainment or what have you. At some point, somebody's going to say to their phone, give me a 45-minute documentary about XYZ in the style of Studio Ghibli, and it's going to generate it. At some points, like more and more things like this will become normal, where people are going to wonder, what is the future like? So you're saying capabilities emerge, we got to keep telling the story, and at some point there, even if they don't see it as a risk yet, there's potentially more buy-in that they would understand why we need governance? Is this...
Exactly. I mean, because here we talk about risks, and here we talk about also benefits, and both sides need governance. You need to govern the risk, and you need to govern the benefit as well. You need to channel the benefits, that this is not only in a handful of few people, few companies, or even few countries, and then how this is going to benefit the rest of the world, or so. What happened in the area of chemical weapons, and why I keep bringing, but there are some interesting examples there.
Go ahead.
There were only a handful of countries who actually owned chemical weapons at that time, and the question was that when countries who did not have chemical weapons, they were asking that, why should we join this convention? Why should we make this universal? So there had to be some things done, and this convention actually embodies incentives for countries who did not possess chemical weapons to be part of this. Right? Yeah. And the incentive here was that sharing the technology for the legitimate use, training productions, people, private sector, other things. So here, situation is similar, but actually different as well. So you really don't want the world when a handful of groups own everything and have everything very, very powerful, and the rest of them may not even be needed. Yeah. So we may be in a very, very dangerous situation there. Even now we have, and lots been talked about, this growing digital divide when only half of the countries in the world have digital strategies, and they invest a lot in this, and which is a good thing, of course, and they should be doing. But another half of the world doesn't have digital strategies, doesn't have technology, is not being invested in that. Yeah. I mean, half of the world doesn't even have a proper internet. So if this grows, what's going to happen there? You will have people with a lot less opportunities and a lot more possibilities of civil unrest, refugees, all of these situations.
Yeah. And obviously the sort of equitable fairness of this stuff is really important for the United Nations writ large. Clearly, it's the ecosystem where you're in. But you're bringing up an interesting point, again, about chemical weapons as a corollary that I really think is totally worth clicking on. And then I'll get back to that sort of, what does the AGI governance do? But this is kind of how part of this is, why is it important to have other countries? From what I'm hearing, what you're saying is, hey, the way we might get buy-in from countries that don't have AGI is to sort of frame this as, hey, well, maybe for the countries that are powerful, you don't want to seem like the ones that are kind of hogging the whole benefit here or the whole power here. And then for the countries that aren't, hey, wouldn't you want to be part of the kind of the decisioning around this technology that you might not have in your country, but is going to determine the future of basically every living human? So for you, there's a preeminence around sort of having this be international from the start. Like, how are you framing this? Because obviously you want this conversation to become a General Assembly thing and to roll forward in a more robust way. What do you think it looks like to get the international world thinking about it now? Is it framing it just like you framed it? Talk to a Colombia or talk to a, Croatia or whatever and let them know, or Georgia, if you go back to the motherland every now and again, and sort of say, hey, this stuff is getting really powerful. I'd want you to be part of this dialogue and just kind of see where this is going and build that slow buy-in. Like, what does this look like for you?
Something like that. I mean, something like this. I think that when you have a powerful technology or powerful AI, something like what we talk about AGI, this is going to affect the entire world, right? And I do believe that for the technology which affects the entire world, it has to be a big part of the world, as a minimum, involved in governing it, getting benefits out of it, as well as minimizing the risks of it. So that something which affects everyone cannot be just decided and governed by just few players as well. Totally. So I believe that it has to be global, it has to be international. There are a lot of things happening at the United Nations right now. There are a couple of resolutions being drafted and promoted, and there is a lot on the responsible use. There's a lot about AI for good. ITU is promoting a lot on the AI for good through its summits, and many other good things are happening there. Yep. And as well as on the risk sides. I mean, we've talked a lot about risks related to current sort of capabilities, and there is a lot of work being done how to prevent that and how to raise awareness of it. And there are some people who would think that, look, thinking about something which is long term might be kind of a sort of distraction from the point which we need to be doing a lot
or whatever,
on today's issues. I believe that today's issues are extremely important, and that's why we are working on it. But I do believe that something which potentially has a power to determine the course of our civilization, and something which is not such an unrealistic, powerful technology, according to many scientists, and this is not one or two who talk about it, and there's a lot of evidence that we're sort of kind of slow rolling, but going towards that direction, as a minimum, needs to be understood on the highest possible level. As a minimum, need to be brought full awareness of it. And as a minimum, we need to be taking steps to build those international mechanisms, how to ensure that this is not going to destroy us, but on the contrary, this is going to help us solve many problems which we haven't.
Yeah. So balancing the near and the far is kind of its own consideration here. I think the importance of having this be international from the start really matters. Kind of two questions to wrap us up on. One is just to tie a bow around the last one, which is kind of you've mentioned a couple times as the logical high level of what governance should be doing, which is let's make sure that the benefits actually can accrue and maybe even accrue to, a pretty wide group of people. And let's also make sure we can, prevent as many of the downsides as we could, especially the existentially horrible ones. I mean, even the Secretary General, I think this is one thing you guys having going for yourself. Even he's tweeted about the actual existential stuff, not just the banal stuff, which is wonderful. Yes. And some of the people on his council, like Talin and Yi Zhang, and there's not a lot of them, but some of the people on that council actually believe in AGI as well. So there's some momentum there. But if that's the case, and that's where we'd want to get to, of course, it would take time to build up to such a thing. I've heard people say, Yudkowsky was on saying, look, ultimately it's going to be about governing hardware and power. We're going to need a way to do the watchdogging of like certain kinds of hardware, certain kinds of power, and have certain sorts of inputs and outputs monitored from models above a certain size by international bodies that can make sure, okay, we're not working on autonomous weapons, or we're not breaking past a certain amount of this manipulation skill or whatever. Now, of course, all of this is crazy hard to measure. There's a million questions in the air here, but that's like one idea. Other people have seen it differently. Okay, managing hardware is going to be hard. Instead, there should be some different mechanism. Like, what do you ultimately think is going to have to undergird this? What does a watchdog even do here?
So I'm a big believer of having some sort of a verification mechanism built which would verify the compliance of whatever it will be agreed upon. So at one point, what will have to happen is that the countries need to agree upon something on AGI or on this powerful AI, right? So they need to agree that if we are building it, we need to ensure that this is not going to do bad things, right? So this will be controllable and we are not going to lose control of that. And whatever the parameters will be, so there has to be a lot of sort of decision making to be done. But after this is all done, trust needs to be given to something which would verify that they are all actually doing it. And that trust needs to be given to some kind of verification mechanism, whether it will be a technology, whether it will be a combination of technology, human beings, some group, something which would actually verify the compliance. Because otherwise, we would live up to the trust of countries to one another, and in the international settings, this is not easily achievable situation.
Yeah, in terms of what we're verifying, I mean, would you see this? A number of folks have brought up again, kind of hardware being the base here. Some people have said it's actually kind of an advantage. There's only so many companies that can make these certain kinds of semiconductor things, and those could all be kind of monitored. Where that hardware ultimately goes could ultimately be kind of monitored. The kinds of efforts to build new hardware could be kind of monitored. And then above a certain power within a certain size of a data center or what have you, that would be part of a grand international watchdog shebang where we'd be able to look at the inputs and the outputs. We'd be able to gauge risk based on a variety of factors and yada, yada. Are you more or less congenial with that idea, or do you see it going differently, maybe not being as dependent on hardware as kind of the core tracking unit here? What matters for you? What do you see as the watchdog's role?
So I think that there will be definitely different options, and I really do believe that we have to explore all of these options, discuss and see the benefits and risks and benefits related to that, pros and cons. I do like the idea of a hardware, although depends how this will be built, who is going to monitor that, how much trust it will be put into, and all of this and that. But I do see this as one of the options and not an ultimate solution. There might be other solutions as well. There might be other options which would actually help us to get to the point when this powerful technology is basically controlled by us for our benefit. Because at the end of the day, this is very simple. What we want is that powerful technology to solve our problems and make our lives better, right? I mean, that's the goal here. Although the road to it is very, very difficult because there could be many different actors involved or many different sort of stakeholders, many different situations involved there, which can actually make this go wrong.
Yeah, and I think there are some different specifics around going right as it's defined by one country versus another. But in general, we all want to stay alive, whatever. I think that there are also some ideas about sort of, as life continues to bubble up, sort of what does that do? But that's not today's conversation. To your point, really the practical concerns immediately for AGI are just like, can this stuff do what we want and make sure it's not wildly uncontrollably doing terrible things? And you're saying, yep, hardware could be part of it, but we got to explore all the other options. Absolutely. I mean, clearly we're so early in the game. It's hard to say that. I'm interested in, for you, and we'll end on one little kind of high note here at the very end, but just as kind of a bullet list from your side, you've listed some of the ways this is different than the world of kind of the chemical weapon space, which again, was a similar sort of mechanism. You got to see it really up close and kind of understand what needs to happen internationally for that stuff to happen. Of course, very, very complex. What I heard in terms of differences was one of them was, this is not a deprecated technology. This is a technology everybody can and will want to use. So that's a challenge. Another thing is, it's vastly more openly multi-use than chemical weapons. Maybe you can use that same chemical for fertilizer, but really, it's not. It's like, but the same AI that could, try to hijack, nuclear submarines or something could hypothetically be used to, cure a disease. It's such a wildly general tech. And then the last thing, I'm just thinking the big bullets that I've collected, I want to see if you have others, because again, you are so close to chemicals. The last one, and I love that you brought this up, was that it's not like, let's let it get there and then think about it. Because by that time, it's already smarter than us. That's way too dangerous. And it's smarter every month. Chemical weapons aren't dangerous every month they sit in their little canister. I mean, they're not twice as dangerous. But in AI, they are. So those were three differences I picked up on. What else for you are the key differences that international players need to know? This is not chemicals and nuclear. It's different. What for you are those crux differences?
Yeah, you said it right. I mean, on the chemical side, biological side, it's a very narrow application. Over there, you have either a weapon or you have a toxic. I mean, you have if you have legitimate sort of chemicals for the chemical industry, which we use it on a daily basis, but it's still on the chemical side. Here, you have something super powerful, which is going to be used in everything, whether it's in education, whether it's security, law enforcement, or the disease or so. Second is that as you said, it's an outdated technology. It was, and now you have something that everybody will want to have it. Another huge difference is that this is a fast-growing technology, AI. Chemical weapon was not a fast-growing technology. First chemical weapons were even used during the First World War. Of course, they've developed and technologically sort of got advanced, but this was a still slow-growing technology. Here you have something which is going super fast. Then, on the AI side, you have potentially a technology which can completely alter the course of our civilization. You potentially have something can actually have people say existential, but yes, it can have a completely existential threat to us as well. So you have super powerful something, and we don't have really a real time frame. When are we going to get to that dangerous sort of a point of no return? And we cannot afford taking chances. Yeah. So this is a vastly different type of situation. Maybe the urgency will prompt us as human civilization to develop those safeguards, safety nets, mechanisms, which will help us to channel this in a right way. But we need to be taking steps. We need to be taking steps now. We need to be building these options and talking about options. And I'm very happy that there are many groups who are already talking about it. But I think that this has to become a mainstream conversation. And I believe that this has to be examined on the mainstream sort of way as well.
Absolutely. And we'll end on a slightly optimistic note. I mean, you've talked about these differences. These are challenges. Fortunately, I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, even the founding of the UN itself was kind of a miraculous thing. If you just look at the history of, human civilization, especially even after, the League of Nations, and people could have been pessimistic, whatever, there's something to be said of the fact that we've done coordination not perfectly at all, but we've done coordination at greater scales than I'm sure anyone 500 years ago could have realistically conceived of. And so this is one of those next leaps where it's going to need to happen. When you look at chemical, nuclear, and you look at what finally tipped the domino. This will be my last question to maybe give some people a glimmer here. Tip the dominoes over to make it like, okay, even the people that would benefit by stockpiling in some way, even they're like, all right, like what do you see as some of the linchpins that historically have gotten folks, even folks who could benefit from kind of hoarding it, or some folks who don't even have the tech, so maybe they don't even want to stand at the table? What sort of got them together, made it click, and actually got this kind of mechanisms to kick in place? What do you see as those linchpins that other people can look forward to and try to catalyze into the future as we close here?
Probably, I mean, maybe I'll answer it in a more philosophical way. Probably this is something what defines us as human beings versus any other species on this planet. Probably this is this inherited sort of a ability to find solutions and collaborate on a massive scale with other human beings when we see a threat, when we see a problem, when we see a sort of a potential, a large issue, that we will actually come together and find the solution. Having said all of this, and this is all very nice and great, we need to take steps. We need to actually examine solutions. We need to bring this up on the highest possible levels and not neglect it until the last moment when there might be too late.
Yeah. I think that's a good note to end on. We've surprised ourselves with looking sternly at something that's coming and then figuring out a way to handle it. This is definitely one of those cases where the next paradigm of ways of coordinating is going to have to kind of come into pass. So, Irakli, great to be able to speak to you, given all your closeness to this process, and kind of level us all up on what this is going to require, boots on the ground. I know that's all we have for time, but thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
And perfect. Thank you to Irakli for being able to join us. And thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in all the way through to the end of this episode. In reflecting on what Irakli sort of said, I very much walked away from this interview saying, okay, there's at least a precedent for what it takes to get to coordination. And there were a lot of things. So clearly, Irakli's very honest that AGI is different than chemical weapons, period. The multi-use element, the supply chain, there's a lot of differences here. And there's a lot of kind of levels of power that chemical weapons could just never achieve compared to if AGI actually occurred. But there were complexities in chemical weapons. There were supply chains. There's many different kinds of chemical weapons. It's not like you're just banning nutmeg from the world. Okay, don't, prevent that tree from being harvested, right? There's so many things that could be chemical weapons. And being able to come up with kind of border checks and balances and the transference of these things and sort of the tracking of these things and coordinated agreement that these things wouldn't be used, that was all, pretty meaningful stuff. But it is also different than AGI and also took far too long. And Irakli was actually quite frank about it, that by the time it fully settled in, it had been years and years and years since maybe chemical weapons would have been realistically kind of a very serious tool of war per se. In other words, it was able to be handled over many decades, which was shocking. Actually, I didn't realize it was that slow and painful, frankly. It was able to be handled many decades after it mostly wasn't that relevant anymore. That's pretty incredible. It at least did happen, possibly. Now, I have no idea. I cannot run the simulation of the world in any other version of the world than the one you and I are currently living in. But possibly it did save some damage, right? If that agreement didn't happen, maybe there would be some warlord somewhere using mustard gas or something. I have no clue. But that's far too much time compared to what we have. And I think Irakli's ideas about what we need to do to kind of poke and prod the system to maybe move things through a little bit faster will give some people in the intergovernmental world a bit of a prod to move faster and to know full well that sort of how this has happened historically is not going to be the pace of change we need to deal with. I also hope sincerely that folks listening to the episode with Dean Shuelan, which is the one directly before Irakli here from last Friday, will be ardently taking up the banner of other approaches. I think if we rely entirely on the United Nations to sort of, knitting the world together, let's let the UN handle it. I believe in the UN. I like the UN. I think there's flaws in the UN. I've read a heck of a lot about the founding of the UN. I've been involved and spoken at headquarters, 7 years ago. I was there recently for the General Assembly where AGI risk was brought up. But can't be the only tool in the toolbox. That's for sure. And I think this episode really made that clear for me. So interested to know what your lessons were. Feel free to share them down in the comments. Otherwise, I very much hope that you've enjoyed this conversation with Irakli. I very much enjoyed having it with him. So look forward to catching you here on the next one here on The Trajectory.